there's going to be a whole lot of in my opinions.
Eliot, we do not deal in opinions on this podcast. We deal in heuristics.
I want facts, damn it.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to go back and talk about a topic that we've talked about before. We're going to be revisiting talking about kind of the pace of the game. Last time we talked about it, very early on in the podcast, within the first year, we talked about pace, and we talked about the pace of combat. We talked about how sometimes painfully long it seemed like it took for our turns to come around in combat and things to do in order to get our turns to happen or come up quicker, how to get through combat faster, keep the game at a fast pace, a fast, high-action pace. This time, though, we're going to be talking more philosophically about the pace of the game and progress within the game. What is our expectation of how much of the game material are we going to get through in a particular session, and talk about how long that session might be, because there are many different scenarios where there are different expectations of how long a quote session of role-playing games take. The official D&D encounters adventures that happen at local gaming shops, those are usually 3-hour blocks that are set aside for a certain amount of material, and there's downloads. I think it's every week that there's material available to try to get through a 3-hour block in a week. I might be misremembering it. It's been so long since I've looked at that. But like at conventions, those are generally in 4-hour blocks. Although our relatively local Origins gaming convention, they're basically 2-hour blocks, with most of the games taking up 2-hour blocks, making a 4-hour game. But I've seen some games that only are for 2 hours, and some games that are for 6 or 8 hours. I've very rarely seen some that are for 8 hours at a time. And then there's how long we actually play whenever we sit around with our friends. And I have played in games where it has been as short as 3 hours, a typical session, and then I've been in some where it is expected that we are going to be playing for most of the day, an 8-hour session or even a 12-hour session, relatively consistently. Now, I have not had any of those since I was about in college. I haven't had just the time of day to sit and play games at that long of a stretch, unless I specifically planned for it and took time off of work and reserved the space for us to go and do that for such a long extended period of time. What are your guys' experiences for how long a actual session of a role-playing game has taken, and has that changed over the years?
I mean, I think the 3 to 4 hour range seems to be the consensus among the games I've played for quite some time. At least, so whenever I create, or whenever you're thinking about putting together a game, thinking about it in terms of what's going to fill 4 hours is usually a good rule of thumb, because typically players take longer than you expect. So if you plan for a 4-hour game, they might only get through about half of it, but it'll still take 4 hours in my experience.
Yeah, I'm about the same. I know that when I was younger and all that, the games definitely were longer. I feel like when I first started gaming, it was maybe like 5 hours would be like a regular slot, and now on my Monday game, we've technically got 4 hours boxed, but 7 to 11 p.m. People don't even really all get settled and ready to go until 7:30 on a good night. And you factor in breaks and stuff like that. If you get 3 hours of solid play, and I feel like we're having a really productive session. I wish it was a little more than that, but that seems to be the best we've been able to manage.
Have any of you gone back and forth between I guess it would have been about 14 or 15 years ago at this point. I kind of shifted to having my game nights be on weeknights. And so that by necessity requires a shorter session because people are getting off of work and you've got to be done in time to be able to go home and then go to bed so you can get up for work the next morning. I kind of, like I said earlier, I had been in college. When I was in college, we played on Saturdays and we would play for between 6 and 12 hours at a block in the dorm rooms. And I had gotten down into the pattern of playing the 3 or 4 sessions. And then I moved and I was trying to find a gaming group in the new city that I was living in. And the group that I joined was a Saturday group. And we were expected to do 6 hours at a stretch. And my pacing had completely gone off of being able to prepare and plan for a 6-hour session because I had gotten so used to 4-hour sessions. Have any of you had to deal with anything like that?
I think I got inducted into the weekday game fraternity pretty young. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I usually worked a job that worked me on Saturdays. So if there were long games on the weekends, I never really got a chance to participate consistently. So all the games I played through my teens and or 20s and early 30s were all weeknight 4 to 5 games at best.
Honestly, I don't remember. I'm trying to think. I feel like Saturday games used to be more the norm for me. Just I guess because of things like what you're talking about, work and stuff like that. I do remember playing in games where Eliot had to miss frequently because of work stuff or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I for one don't like the work week evening kind of game. I always feel like it's too crammed and you're too much of a crunch to try to wrap up in time because you got to go to bed and wake up and serve the masters. But I think that it's super hard to get anybody to do anything on a weekend at a regular interval anyway. So I don't know.
So whenever I had to switch, whenever I switched from 3 or 4 hours games that I was prepping to 6-hour game prepping, the very first time I ran, I prepped what I would normally think would take a session, and that was a 3 or 4 hour session. And it was a case where my players actually got through all of the material, and then we had an hour and a half left at the end of the night. That has probably been the only time, at least in my memory, that I have gone through more material than I actually had during the course of the session. I feel like the majority of time it takes way longer to get through the material that I have prepared than what I expected. Most often I will think, okay, this adventure will maybe take 3 or 4 sessions for the player characters to get through, and then we get to playing it, and it ends up being a 6 to 8 session amount of material to go through. And when it comes to like con games, I have run a few, and at this point I design my adventures to have 4 encounters, approximately 1 encounter per hour. And by encounter I mean not just combat, I mean like either there's some sort of plot development that is going to happen within about an hour of the game for each hour that we play. And I try to leave room to be able to cut stuff out or combine plot points if inevitably it feels like we're running long or we're running against time. What do you guys do whenever you prepare for material? How much material do you prep ahead of time, and kind of what do you expect to be the pace at which the characters will get through the material that you have for them?
So my current campaign is entirely module driven, so I don't have to sit and work out a story really, much less a dungeon. That stuff's all provided, so I don't have to worry about any of that. The prep that I have to do for this is mostly like multimedia sorts of things where, I have to make sure that I have cool looking tokens for everything. You guys are largely drawing your own maps, so I don't even have to worry about battle maps and stuff, but, there's still shit you gotta finagle with your VTT. The other stuff would be like, if I want to use some sound effects or something like that to have some kind of interesting little bit of interactivity to the thing. So most of the time, my prep, once I've got that stuff kind of put together and have the monsters that I know are going to show up in the module, like get their stats in place, I usually do a read through or two of the module, well in advance. And then before, in the week prior, I'll read up on the sections that you guys are likely to get to from wherever you currently are, just to refresh myself. But that's about it. Everything else is just kind of like going room by room in that old school procedural fashion, and shit happens as it occurs. If you guys have done stuff like, when you infiltrated the Temple of the Frog or whatever, and, the alarm goes out, and so then there's kind of this, active adversary element going on that I have to keep track of, off screen somewhere on other levels, and, they know there's an intruder. What do they know about you? What's their counterattack, their defensive measures going to look like, all that. A lot of that I'm just kind of doing on the fly. This is probably the least amount of actual game story prep that I've ever had to do for a thing, because I have no idea what you guys are going to do. And if I would set something like that up, odds are you wouldn't even go in the direction that I thought you would anyway. So, you guys are largely, driving the bus on this one.
Drop a pro tip. If you ever want to eat up about 30 minutes of time, give a party a binary choice, an either or. Oh man, that can take quite some time without intervention from the DM.
I think you're being very conservative saying that it'll eat up 30 minutes of time. It'll eat up as much time as you allow it to eat up as the DM.
For some reason, whenever I'm thinking about a game, even whenever I'm in a module, I usually try to think of it in terms of what combat's going to be seen. There were times, I remember when I ran in a module, I ran Curse of Straw, there was a few times that you guys had kind of ran into a part of the book that didn't have a lot of action. And I remember intentionally building in combats that were not in the book, just for some reason because I needed, in my mindset, I needed to have that 30-minute to... Well, I guess we just did the math. It's between 30 and 50% of the session ran in combat rounds. So any game that is just story based, it can be easy to run out of material that way. So I always would insert a combat even if it wasn't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's kind of like the problem with living as a liar. You've got to keep track of all the lies that you've been telling all along. It's the same way when you're doing, a story-driven game and you're just improvising, or just trying to elaborate on some real rough notes or whatever. You're in a way lying and have to keep up with all of the shit you've been talking the entire time. So your workload gets much heavier. Combat's honest. Combat's, straightforward, clear cut.
Eliot, you said that whenever you were running, you were trying to aim for a 30 to 50% of time being spent in combat. That's kind of a segue into some statistics that I have accumulated over the past week. In our games, I've been keeping track of the amount of time specifically in combat that we took. And I've got some stats here that I wanted to share with everybody. In Jordan, your Monday game, like you said, we play about 4 hours at a stretch. And during last Monday's game, we spent 61 minutes of those 4 hours in combat. That ended up being 7 rounds of combat spread out over 5 players and the DM for an average of 1.74 or 1 minute and 45 seconds per turn per player for the combat. I'm going to quickly run through my other games. Our Savage Worlds game, I had a hard time deciding whether or not to include this statistic because we didn't technically have any combat. What we did was a chase using the chase rules in the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition book. And this was the first time I had ever run a chase using those rules. But we had 3 players and the GM doing 8 rounds of chase over 94 minutes, which averaged to 2.93 minutes per turn, which is approximately 2 minutes and 50 seconds per turn. And then, game you guys weren't in, my Wednesday face-to-face D&D group, we played at face-to-face, and it was a 3-hour block. We played a total of combat in 96 minutes, so about half the session. And we had, at various points, we had 5 players, and we had dropped down to 4 players at one point. But the average time spent per turn in that was 2.18 minutes per turn, which is approximately 2 minutes and I think 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So I was very shocked by these numbers. If you had asked me before what I thought average combat took, I would have said somewhere between the 3 to 5 minutes per player per turn for a combat.
Can you summarize that one more time? We had my old school AD&D game. We had Savage Worlds, and we had 5e. And what was the average per turn for each one of those?
Okay. First edition D&D, your game was 1.74 minutes per turn. D&D 5e was 2.18 minutes per turn. And then Savage Worlds was 2.93 minutes per turn.
So pretty wide swings there.
Yeah, I was very shocked. I wasn't shocked at how low your numbers were, Jordan, because you have done a hell of a lot of work to automate a lot of the process. Do you kind of want to go into what exactly you have automated for the first edition game?
Yeah, sure. So for one thing, we are doing initiative in a group way. Now we're doing that a version of that kind of old school BX way where you got phases to initiative and for melee and missile and blah blah blah. But the sides go, so I don't really care about individual initiative scores. Those are rolled every turn, but they are rolled. I can just plug things into a spreadsheet and it'll automatically populate. Everybody's character sheet is on another spreadsheet, and they've got a little drop down there to pick which phase of the combat they want to go in, depending on if they want to cast a spell or what have you. So all that stuff kind of auto-populates, and that makes things go really quick. I can look at this list in every phase of, okay, here's the combatants that I gotta talk to, and then I just go, Clayton, Eliot, blah, 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 real fast. The other thing that I would consider this a type of automation is that people just tell me what they want to do, and I roll for them. I don't think anyone's ever actually laid hands on dice to make a roll in this campaign. They've got, I can see their stats. I make the roll, quickly calculate things based on the monster stats I'm looking at or whatever. And then the application of the results, the damage, I just drop that into whatever their current hit points are, and all of the, penalties for damage or any other kind of stuff that, is a secondary effect of whatever just happened, that all gets applied automatically through formulas that I've set up. So nobody's got to go through and do any math or any of that. It's just boom, boom, boom. Mechanics are being executed more or less on command from the player characters.
Have you noticed that this streamlining has made you more thankful for running inside of a module? Do you think if you were creating the story side as well, that sometimes the time that's eaten up with the adjudication of different roles, do you think that having the system too streamlined forces you to confront with story and plot and all that stuff? You know what I mean?
I noticed that early on, before we had really gotten into module content very much, when we were doing some of that kind of prehistory of D&D adventure that was kind of the foundation of this campaign. I was noticing when I first started, if you remember, we didn't even have skill proficiencies. I dropped that in later. And I found myself reaching for stuff like that because it was exhausting. When you're the DM, nothing is happening really if you're not talking about it. And so you constantly have to be talking to keep the fucking holodeck from fritzing out and then people see the grid behind it, So I'd find myself reaching for things like perception checks as like a crutch and stealth checks and just anything I can think of to occupy some time so that my brain can catch up. It's much easier now that we're sort of exploring the dungeon together. I don't know that I would want to do a full-on improv thing this way, with so much of the workload being taken off of the player characters. Because the other thing that happens is that the players, since they have less to do as far as busy work, bookkeeping stuff, then they're making more plans and making more demands of what they want to do. Well, can I do this? Well, can I do that? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm desperately trying to keep up with trying to figure out how to adjudicate all these different directions that people might go. Plus, it's a big fucking group. 7 players is on the large side. I don't care who you are. But, yeah, I've had to learn to not rely so much on the filler mechanics as much as I would with modern games.
And Jordan, I would say that your style of DMing, you allow the players ample time to figure things out. You allow players ample time to talk amongst themselves, figure out what we're going to do. And I know that sometimes we get long in the tooth on doing that, and you're like, okay, guys, I need a decision. But for the most part, you definitely, not on the most part, pretty much every time, you do give plenty of time for us to think about things and to figure out what we're going to be doing next. I have been in games where that is not the case. The DM always wants to be talking. The DM is afraid of silence. The DM is afraid of the player sitting there thinking, because I don't know why, but I've been in games where the DM always has to be saying something if there is any sort of a lull in what is happening at the table. And Eliot, I want to cut you off because I think you're probably going to worry that this is you. This is absolutely not you.
I relate a little more to that description, though, than Jordan's, for sure.
I like to give people as much time to work shit out as whatever the unit of time is for what's going on in the game. So, in traditional D&D, when you're walking through tunnels and, picking locks and whatever, That's on the scale of a turn, which is about 10 minutes. Combat in older editions is on the scale of rounds, which are about 1 minute. And so at the beginning of every round of combat, I like to give the group, roughly a minute real time to talk about group strategy and whatever. And then, when you're wandering down corridors or whatever, give you all 5-10 minutes to talk it out, figure out which direction you want to go, what things you want to check out. Lots of times there's different things competing for your attention simultaneously, and it's not obvious which way the plot goes, because the plot isn't in any particular direction. The plot's emergent from that play. And if I can figure out an excuse to step back and have the group be talking amongst themselves, I'm going to take it every chance I can get, up to a point. I still want things to progress, but that's one of those fundamental things that people always talk about OSR kind of philosophy of gaming is the emergent story, from when you just step back and let the player characters decide what they want to do, rather than trying to figure out, like, okay, I've got these 5 story beats for the night, and I need to crack the whip and get these fuckers from scene A to scene B and yada yada. Like, that's not the game I'm running.
So, on the topic of like old school style of game, I have read things about con games and stuff from like the 70s and early 80s, games run by Gary Gygax, where in a con block, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, they would do, like, according to the things I've read, they would play Tomb of Horrors, they would play Castle Greyhawk, and I'm looking at how long these original modules were, and like Tomb of Horrors, even in an 8-hour block, I can't imagine getting through all of that material in 8 hours. And looking at Castle Greyhawk, it had, like, I eventually learned that it wasn't, oh, we're going to clear out Castle Greyhawk. It was, we're going to spend the entirety of this session just going down and exploring Castle Greyhawk, and you get as far as you get, and then the end of the session is whenever we run out of time. But when it comes to published modules, and I've read a lot about Tomb of Horrors because I've run it, and it's one of those that I look at the material and I'm like, there is no way. How could a group get through that material? They would have to be on the ball and just at every opportunity, just no deliberate. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Okay, let me try that again. At every obstacle that they come to in Tomb of Horrors, they would have to be just making decisions and going with those decisions on how to figure out these puzzles, rather than my experience of whenever the players get to a puzzle, they slow down, they look at it, they try to work it out, they try to piece together how to get through this. And it takes a long time. I cannot see how you can get through some of these old modules that are claimed to have gotten through in an 8-hour block. Do you feel like, or do you think that the way that the players play is fundamentally different than it was back then? Or do you feel that maybe this is just kind of a thing that happened where all of these adventures that people said that they did, it was just, we just went and saw how far we could get into it, rather than we went and we beat the Tomb of Horrors?
There's a few different things to address there. So for one thing, con modules, like tournament modules, they are very different than story modules. They've got a scoring system in there, and individual players are scored for how their characters do. And a large part of that scoring has to do with how much of the module that you get through and if you get to the end. So all of the players know that they are doing like a time trial thing to run through this thing. There's a an explicit incentive. The other thing is that I get the sense that, especially in the 70s, prior to the really heavily story-driven modules from like Tracy Hickman and that kind of generation, role-playing was much more of a metagame kind of experience, from what I can tell. I don't think it was frowned upon the way that it kind of is now, that people thought about it as a game that they're trying to beat. And, people would run through stuff, people would recognize shit. That's a troll. I know that I have to set it on fire to beat it. It doesn't matter if my character's never seen a troll before. That's just what you do. Familiar traps, things like that. These were players that, knew what they were doing. And then you have the Tomb of Horrors come out as, from all accounts, it was kind of Gary Gygax's response to players like that. It was a challenge to these players who had memorized all these monsters, had figured out exactly what they need to roll to hit a basilisk or whatever, and so it was sort of a pro module. Then you have 40 years or whatever of additional, or now 50 years. Like I think Tomb of Horrors came out in 76 or 77, something like that. A long time ago. You've got this like legend that builds up of this, meat grinder module for people to get through. So now if people play Tomb of Horrors, they're going to, walk through it like a minefield. And another thing I think is the actual execution of play, because in 1E AD&D, they talk about the caller, and that is a thing. Up until the release of 2nd edition, I think, is when the caller kind of falls out of favor. But you see it in BX, you see it in BECME, I believe. You have one leader who is the default spokesperson for the team. They know their team well. They're acting like Cyclops or Captain America or what have you. And they are calling the shots as you run through the corridors. They know where the wizard's supposed to stand. They know where the fighters are supposed to be to guard the doors. They know that the rogue is supposed to be out there checking for traps, picking locks, whatever. And it seems to me like everybody else kind of sits silently unless something comes up where they want to say, no, I'm not going to do that default action for my character. I'm going to do this other thing for this reason. So I think a whole lot more of the game was a back and forth between the DM and the caller, and the rest of the group kind of listening in and waiting for when it's their turn to roll some dice or, go against what the caller has to say. And Gygax even kind of suggests that if a player does something different than what the caller was kind of ordering their character to do, that maybe the DM gives that character some penalties, and he kind of leaves it at that. So a very different way of conducting a module from what we play today.
I mean, and you can never discount the time-honored strategy of either just cutting a big chunk of it out or just not finishing it. I don't disagree. I have no experience. I would imagine that the original players of this game were a lot more like that, but I've seen a lot of games. They all tend to move at the same pace, no matter who they are. I'd say they just didn't finish them most of the time. That would be my guess.
Well, spoiler alert for Tomb of Horrors, but about halfway through the adventure, there is a false ending. If you're not one of those players or one of those groups who literally search everything, you will get less than halfway through the module, think you've beaten it, and then head out.
There's an extra incentive for speed here that I think bears mentioning, and that is that TSR was running these tournament modules at Origins and Gen Con as paid events. They were making tons of money for entry fees to these modules, and so they have an economic incentive to get people through these things and not, they've got hours boxed off that here's where we'll be playing this module. They need to get it done by this time, whatever, and then move on to the next round of people that are also paying to be there. So this was, a not insignificant part of TSR's income in the early days, according to Tim Kask and others who were there for it.
I wish that I had would have already done the true dungeon that appears at gaming conventions, where it's basically a LARP of going through a dungeon. I would want that experience to be able to compare that, going through that, knowing that, because that feels like it's more of this tournament style thing that you're describing, where you definitely know you've got a block of time and you've just got this dungeon and you've got to try to get through it in the time allotted. I feel like a lot of convention games, at least the convention games that I've been a part of and that I've run, they definitely do have that aspect of, this is the amount of material, let's see if we can get through it. But there isn't that. But the game master definitely has an endpoint that they are working toward, and there is a lot of flexibility that the game master uses to manipulate whether or not the material is gotten through in that time period. With Jordan, you referenced earlier the shift in the expectation of there being a more story-oriented game rather than what it was probably back in the day.
There's also the fact that, kind of along those same lines, that, since it's a tournament module, and I get the sense that it was also like this for a lot of people's home games, that players back then were much less precious about their characters surviving for an entire campaign. It seems like there was a lot more of kind of a gung-ho, let's see what happens, and then when your character does explode from stepping on an invisible rune trap or something, then everybody laughs, and then you grab one of your backup characters and march onward. So I think a lot of that, like, really careful, meticulous way of plotting through a dungeon that takes a long time for some games maybe wasn't that big of a deal. And I've played with some players that still kind of play that way, and it's pretty hilarious to watch.
We've talked a lot about combat and the dungeon style of adventure. I want to talk also about other types of adventure where it's the vampire style of adventure, where the adventure is going to be talking. The adventure is going to be interacting with NPCs or other PCs. What are your experiences for, one, whether or not those games are, quote, fast-paced, or whether they just feel slow-paced by default, and that is the expectation? Personally, I think I view those types of games as more as definitely more slow-paced. They're more I don't want to say methodical, but they're more cerebral, I guess would be a better way of describing those types of games. Do you feel like have you had to plan out those types of games where the pace is a lot slower, or the pace isn't just combat, and you've got to figure out how much material is what you want to have for the session, and how do you balance what you prep versus how much the players can get through? Or do you try to balance that?
It's not been that long ago that I ran in the World of Darkness, and my prep was kind of the same. I always, shoehorned where I thought a combat would be, and then whatever bookends that event can usually be, counted on to take up about half the session. I have noticed that in World of Darkness, you kind of, I don't know, I guess the story beats are a little different, and sometimes the social interactions become your quote-unquote combat. But, even in those games, I've found people really like a good fight, so I usually try to make sure there's at least one every session.
I don't really run games like that I know of. Let me know if I'm lying about that. I don't think I have. At least it hasn't come to mind in a while. I tend to shy away from the much more role-play heavy kind of gaming, because when I sit down at a table, my first thought is, what's the actual game here? The improv theater stuff has just never really been something that really gets me going. So I'm wondering, like, what are we actually playing? It's just my taste.
So whenever I am designing this type of thing, like I said earlier, at the very beginning of the podcast, I try to do a story beat per hour. That's my goal. A story beat might be a combat. It might be, if it's an investigation, going to a crime scene and gathering evidence and processing that evidence in order to give whatever clues are relevant to the investigation that is going on. I generally hold across game systems and across game genres that 1 hour per plot point as my default pace that I like to go through during the game. And Jordan, your games, well, particularly Apocalyptia, is a game that's more focused on exploration more than anything. Exploration of the environment, dealing with the obstacles that are in the environment. Do you have like a rule of thumb that feels like it's the right amount of time to take and do something, or is it just as it happens, you just produce more information or more material as the players complete it, you just produce more material until the end of the session? Do you pace it out, or do you just provide more and more and more until the session is ended?
I don't really pace anything out. The closest that I get to that is, like I was saying, with the Temple of the Frog. If you guys have gotten the attention of an antagonist of some kind that is going to be an agent acting in game time at the same pace, that might fuck with whatever you guys are doing. And I've got some kind of idea of, what their plan might be. And that's hard to do, to kind of keep track of what the bad guys know versus what you as a DM knows, and trying to keep that fair. That's another discussion. But I rarely ever have like set piece stuff in mind that's like this, contrived situation that people are going to fall into. Every now and then I'll have like an idea that I just want to see how it flies, and I'll drop it in somewhere. But to me, the best pace to run a game at is whatever pace the players want to play at. Unless they're completely spinning their wheels, arguing and, wasting time on some dumb shit, then I'll, figure out how to get things out of the ditch. But it's not my job to push a group of adults through my story. It's to, kind of walk a few paces ahead of them and make sure that there's always some road there for them to step on, if they choose to go in that direction. It's almost like a, catering to solipsism sort of, affair.
The joys of a module.
And I want to clarify on my design philosophy. Like, I plan for a particular plot point to take about an hour. If it's going to take, if we get into it and it takes longer, I'm not going to be trying to push it on prematurely. If it's shorter, I'm not going to try to just pad it out. I might throw in a combat or quote random encounter if I need more time, but those are just DMing tricks rather than to fill out to mitigate any problems of pacing, rather than my actual planning for the pace of the session.
Yeah, and it's not just about modules either, Eliot. Like Apocalyptia, I never wrote any modules for that. It relies completely on spontaneous generation of the world via tables. What kind of area that you're in, what kind of entities you might encounter there, what loot's around, whatever. That's all random creation. So that's one of the things that keeps things exciting for me is discovering with the rest of the party what's going to happen. It's much less satisfying if I already know ahead of time, exactly what's going to go on, except for that bit of randomness that is the player character's actual behavior.
Is there a point at which you realize, oh my God, nothing is happening? Now we need to get on. We need to make a decision. Like what is that point for you? What are the things that happen that tell you we need to move on, we need to advance? We are just spinning our wheels. We're stuck. We're stuck going in circles and we're stuck in a loop. Like, what are the signs that is something that, okay, we've reached this point? I would say for me, and I've seen you guys do this as well, like whenever we get into as characters discussions and it's just the same points are being brought up again and again and again, and there's no new information being brought in, it's just this cycle. That's usually whenever I try to break it up. But then there's there is when you're in a talky bit with conversation with an NPC, and the conversation really has gone its course. How do you guys transition then from the end of that conversation to the next scene or the next thing that happens?
So I had a situation that I thought was something like this come up a few sessions ago after you guys had already finished Fitzgerald's Tomb, and before you decided to go into Castle Crake, you guys were just hanging out in Crakesboro, and there were a few things going on. Steele's duplicate character was up to some nefarious stuff, and a few minor things happening. But I did not at all intend for that to be the entire session, and I had the reflex to try to crack the whip and get you guys into the next dungeon. And Eliot specifically said, he's like, well, we don't have to spend every session in the dungeon. And I didn't hear any pushback from that. Everybody else seemed like they were engaged and were having fun to have a chance at role-playing almost completely with each other. And so that was one of the easiest sessions I've had to run. I just let you guys deal with this, internal party issue however you chose. And that's great. When you're in the wilderness or when you're in a dungeon, you've got a lot of mechanisms to keep things moving along. You've got, wandering monsters that you can roll. You've got, intelligent antagonists that knows that you're there messing with you or whatever. And the party usually has some diminishing resource that they're spending by being there. If it's, food or torches or whatever. If you guys are having some argument in a dungeon and I've allotted some amount of real time for you guys to talk about what you want to do, if it goes over a turn, I don't say this to anyone. I just quietly mark off all of your lamp oil, all of your torches. One more turn has been spent because in real time you guys are talking. And then, sooner or later you're going to be out of light and in the middle of a dungeon in the dark and you'll be fucked. So the world's going, whether the group is, taking another step forward or not. But like Ellie was saying, sometimes it's cool to let people just sit and, enjoy their victory and shoot the shit and deal with internal stuff.
And that's a very good mechanic for getting the players to come out of that cycle, is like you where you are keeping track of torches and lamp oil. We can suddenly realize, oh, we are out of it. We are out of light. The problem that I see more often than not is players not realizing that they themselves are stuck in this rut. And having something like that definitely breaks the cycle. In a lot of games that I run of particularly 5e where light is a cantrip. It's something that you can cast and recast and recast. It kind of goes by the wayside that this is a resource that is getting used up and has to be redone. I would, sitting here as we're talking about this is a point of advice that I would give is, if you are the DM and you feel like things are just going on and you feel like the things need to progress in another way, or you just need to do something to break the cycle, maybe just telling the players your light spell has run out. That'll give the player a mental check of, oh, time is passing. What have I accomplished?
The only thing I have to add, because both of what you guys said is pretty much exactly how I feel as well. But, as far as when to intercede, I think it's more like I look for silence. Like if a party is discussing something amongst themselves, even if they're at loggerheads, if everybody's still engaged and everybody has a voice and it's actually a contentious kind of in character or out of character conversation, I just kind of let it roll. Because as a DM, you can't really buy those time. You can't really buy the time to get your players engaged. And if everybody's talking and interacting, even if it's to argue or to dither or go in the complete wrong direction, if they're all engaged and making those choices together, you just let them lead you. But whenever everybody goes silent, that's usually my cue that that's time to do something to get them jump started again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits that exists for face-to-face gaming, is that whenever you get into those cycles, you can tell everybody is engaged by looking at them. It's much harder in an online game when you're playing, even if you can see the other faces through webcams. You can't tell whether they're looking at the screen or of the game or whether they are just looking at Reddit or whatever. It becomes very difficult to tell whenever everybody is engaged or whether it's just the two people who are talking and talking, because that is usually what happens in my experience. There's two people who are sitting there talking and the other people are silent. They could be engaged or they could be completely checked out.
Let me ask you guys what you think about this. I've been considering, since I have these character sheets that are in Google Sheets and therefore allow me some interactivity with the players via a main dashboard sheet that ties all those character sheets together. I've been considering adding basically just like a little checkbox or something that's just a general purpose kind of voting mechanism where if I want to say something like, okay, who's ready to move on to the next thing, and have people either check the thing or don't. Something like that, just like a quick way to poll the group. Everybody spend 5 seconds rather than having to check in with each person individually. I could see that serving a lot of different purposes. What do you guys think about that idea?
You mean like just a simple yes/no checkbox option, and whatever question you ask for the group?
I like this idea in terms of, always like, how do you adjudicate those social roles? Because, whenever we get in role play scenarios, everybody wants to lean. I found that like everybody kind of wants to lean on their percentages. So, if you can get them to say anything, I've thought it would be fun in a game to incentivize doing a good job by letting your fellow players judge how good you did. So if you say, okay, we'll try to convince this guy, what kind of case are you going to make? You make the case, and then you poll the other players to see how they did, and then you base like a difficulty roll or something. You like give them a modifier of some sort, something. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's funny, because nobody else gets to see what other people's votes are. It's all blind.
I thought that would be fun.
Worth trying out.
Here's a question for you guys. Is there such a thing as a role-playing game that is moving too fast?
Yes, but I like just general yes, but I would say that it is more on the scale of the campaign rather than an individual session.
Okay, well, let's talk more about that then, because we've been very, very focused on individual session stuff here, and I'm this is one of the things that I think about a lot. If I'm running a dungeon that I expected, or a module that I expected to be, 2-3 sessions, and you guys are on like session 7 or 8 in the same damn dungeon, and I've got other content that I'd like to see you guys get to, and I often wonder, are people just tired of the same goddamn place week after week? What is kind of the optimal amount of time for let's call it a chapter? Eliot, what do you think?
Throw it at me one more time.
Okay, so let's take for example my game on Mondays. You guys are in a pretty well defined portion of the game. I'll call it a chapter, where you guys are in this valley, this county crake, right? And within it, there's a handful of different things that you can do. There was, talking to the dragon. There's hanging out in Crakesborough. There's Fichelrak's tomb. There's Castle Crake. It's a finite amount of things to do in this place. 2 game modules. But, it's the same setting week after week after week that you guys are dropping in and playing it. Same set of NPCs are around, same antagonists, whatever. Once you guys are done with this, you're going to leave here, probably never come back again, move on to, a next chapter of the game with a whole nother lineup of things to do. So what in your mind is is the point where you start getting bored that we've been in the same goddamn valley for 3 months or whatever? Time to move on and figure out what's going on in some other part of the world.
Almost immediately, I'm just that player.
What does that mean? Almost immediately, you want to be in a different place every session?
No. I just usually found that games tend to go slower than faster in my experience. So I think the original question was like, can you go too fast? I think what you're kind of aiming at is that usually it's the opposite. We're going way too slow, and should you intervene to speed them up or whatever? That gets back to the whole, player thing. It's like, what should be the incentive here? If it's taking forever to get through a dungeon, that's just the incentive on the player to kind of hurry up. I feel like we've gotten better at getting faster as time has gone on because you haven't, thrown us a life preserver. We've drowned plenty of sessions where we've just done nothing. If you start interceding too much, then you start hustling them down some road that maybe the players aren't trying to go down at that particular moment. Does that make sense? I mean, I get the point of getting frustrated and being like, come on, guys, come on. But at the same time, the more you intercede, I think that chafes on me worse than being bored in a place, because I can't blame the DM at that point. It's because we're going too fucking slow. And if I want to hurry up, I need to do something as a player to make that happen,
Well, I guess I'm not really talking about, forcing people to get through the content that I've already presented. There's kind of a supply side control that I have where I can turn off the spigot of more content to deal with in a given place and then kind of force you guys to move on to the next oasis of storyline somewhere else. For example, in this County Crake, in the original module as it was in the Dungeoneer, there were they crammed 5, maybe 6 some of them were mini dungeons, and Castle Crake's probably the biggest, into this one little area because they were just trying to make a compendium of all the completely disconnected dungeons that they'd published in the zine up to that point. But I cut out a bunch of those because they were kind of irrelevant and put one of them in a completely different location. And so I guess that's kind of what I meant by how long do you want the player characters to just kind of orbit around this one little town before moving on to, do other things. But yeah, it is a completely separate question from, is there such a thing as a pace that is too fast?
Well, I think I might be going at a different aspect of this question, but on a completely separate note, you were talking about, do you get tired of the same location orbiting around this same small town? in games in general, I do like to have a home base if at all possible. Some games don't allow it. Your game probably doesn't allow it, but if at all possible, to give.
No, it absolutely does. It's a part of it. The thing is, you just move from town to town and orbit around that new town wherever the next part of the game is.
I like having, even if it's temporary, a place to have recurrent NPC relationships, because the more I think it's more engaging whenever you get familiar with a place as a player.
Well, spoiler alert, as the game progresses and you guys get into, higher levels and stuff, what I'm ultimately trying to push you guys towards is the city of Greyhawk to be your main point around which you orbit, because literally the entire continent orbits around the city of Greyhawk, and it's big enough to have its own adventure within the city, plus equidistant access to all kinds of other adventures, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Well, that sounds fun.
So whenever I said yes that a campaign can go too fast, what I meant was, and this isn't actually pace, this is more just the style of games, the style that I've encountered a lot of GMs who do not allow me as a player to do my own thing with my character. And by that I mean every single character I make, they aren't just an adventurer. They don't just go into dungeons, kill things, take out loot. There are things I want to do. My characters have goals other than the mission. And I feel like, yes, games do go too fast when I am never given the opportunity to do the things outside of the adventure that I want my character to do and accomplish.
Yeah, I've worried about that a lot with all of the wizards and clerics in the group, because a big part of your guys' character stuff is creating new spells, researching, studying the spell books and scrolls and whatever you might have gathered, and magic items that you picked up, getting all those identified, and making potions. Like there's a whole lot of downtime activity that goes into characters like that, and I don't personally have a good way of that I would want to force downtime to happen. You guys have just kind of been moving at whatever pace you want to, and if the healing from the priest has made it so that nobody ever has to wait days in a place for somebody to recover. So I've kind of left the planning of downtime stuff to be up to you guys as much as possible. I've tried not to give you too many doomsday clock kind of scenarios to have to constantly be running against.
I get sick of the types of campaigns where the entire campaign feels like it's going at breakneck pace, where it is one adventure, immediately leads into the next adventure, immediately leads into the next adventure, immediately leads into the next adventure, and every single session we are doing adventure, and that is the entirety of the session. And yes, there can be in-character interaction during the course of the sessions, but there's just not time for your character to breathe. It seems anathema to a lot of players to let their characters go on vacation. Like, the idea that my character isn't 100% completely optimizing every single minute of every single day, it seems like it goes against a lot of players' idea of what they want their characters to do and be, and that is not the way I want to play. I want to try to play a character who takes 3 months off to do something. Maybe it's build a castle, maybe it's researching spells, maybe it's having a family. I can count on a single hand the number of campaigns that I've been in almost 25 years now, where I have had the opportunity to do those types of things. I could count on one hand, and I don't even need all my fingers to do it.
So, like I was saying before, there's kind of a supply side to this and a demand side to this. as far as, where the new adventure comes from. Do you feel like this should be something that is handled amongst the players on the demand side, or do you feel like it's the DM's job to, create like kind of hard bookends and like montages over spans of time that people are like, all right, guys, we're going to take 6 months off. Tell me what you guys are doing for those 6 months. And then I'm going to have another, call to adventure for you.
I think it's more like that of having being the DM and stating, okay, there is this amount of downtime that is available. Because in my experience, the players will never take it. The players will never designate it. The players are the ones who are pushing for the breakneck pace that I don't care for. And this is my experience both as a DM and as a player. As a DM, I've made it available, and like in our Savage Worlds game, I have explicitly stated that there are going to be long periods of downtime. Even in those situations, like I've never been in a campaign as a player where I haven't been outvoted for taking downtime. I vote for it in every campaign I'm in, and either the players vote me down or the DM is running a breakneck pace campaign, and there's just no option of doing it.
Eliot, what do you think?
I think that, thinking back to when I ran a lot of 5th edition with downtime, I think that if a system enables the players to do something credible with that time, then it's more likely to happen. So I recently read over this book called Pendragon. It's a basic role-playing type of game. But it builds in an entire phase called the Winter Phase. It's set in, I think it's set in like King Arthur time. And so they simulated the fact that when the winter would come, everybody would stop, building that into the game where they gamified downtime. I think in systems, or if you can go out and steal a way to gamify downtime, then, because in my experience, when you do run downtime in a system that doesn't actually set aside some rules for it or give you some groundwork, then it usually just ends up becoming a pause. And then it's like scene on, scene off. It's like, you know what I mean? And the only thing that's changed is time. And then all of a sudden that introduces so many complications for a DM. But if you have a system that already has that built into it, assuming this is what gives you kind of a groundwork what to do with them, then I think, that's usually more likely for long periods of downtime to happen and that kind of character growth to happen.
Yeah, I think this is completely a system-based question here. If there's an incentive to take time off or not. I don't know, because I haven't given you guys an obvious opportunity to take a lot of downtime in a like urbanized area yet. But my hunch is that there is probably an appetite for downtime in our Monday group. And part of the reason I suspect that is because you guys are going to be walking out of Blackmore with a lot of money to spend, and the common marketplace is not going to do it with just swords and the basic shit that you can purchase. And so the next thing to do is spend that money on training to get better, which takes weeks, or spend that money on buying a boat, building a castle, getting a bunch of retainers, like setting yourself up as some kind of lord or something. I was just looking today at Old School Essentials, which has a really nice, I think, elegant way of building your stronghold for your group, and I think it's almost completely lifted out of BX D&D. But I look forward to that being a thing at some point in this game. But yeah, like in 5th edition, where wizards just get their next level of spells, and it doesn't require any time, any money. It just kind of appears. I don't think the group wants you and Steele and now Ed and also Jack to be wandering around with a suboptimal amount of spells when you guys are capable of Coleman is capable of Fireball and Lightning Bolt right now. You guys just haven't had the time to get those things. that's a whole tier of new play. Like, it's game changing when you get stuff like that.
All I know is I need a golden ring. Sneaky Pete needs some gold. He needs a chain. I can't wait.
That's one thing that I think I might spend some time messing around with is some other mini game type activity for the non-casters during times like that, like doing heists, doing gladiator fights for the fighter or whatever. Figure out some other cool shit to do, because I love those kinds of downtime mini games personally.
I would like to throw in about that. Please be wary of making the fighters and things and rogues and stuff like that, making their downtime activities earn money, whereas the casters have to spend money.
Oh, you poor thing. You have to spend money to get your godlike powers.
I'm not concerned about me having to spend money. I'm concerned about everybody else earning money while I'm busy getting my godlike powers.
Nobody else is earning the ability to fly invisibly and rain fireballs down on armies.
I was looking...
Yes, they are, because I will be casting invisibility and fly on my my other player characters.
I was looking over a sub book of the Mithra system, where they go into some additional options to build into the game, and one of them is a social combat type of encounter. And what they've done is for those players who have rhetorical skills, players who like to engage, like they're on the more social end of the spectrum, or those players that just kind of have a secret, good social skill in the back that never gets used. It creates almost like it creates a mirror of the combat system, and it simulates like rhetorical back and forth between two players. And it's more than just roll your persuade. Okay, you succeed. He believes you. It makes it a little more nuanced than that, which it seems like it could be a lot, but also I think it could be fun, because I don't know. It's just when you have a lot of social roles, they usually kind of are the least fun to play.
Well, do we want to go on to geek things? All right. I got to pull up my links. Somebody else go first.
I can go ahead and go. So I wanted to geek out about a YouTube channel. Let me find it real quick. All right, it's called InWills. It's a YouTuber. He does role playing games and some other stuff, but he's doing a deep dive of the Mithra system that's been really helpful. I've been kind of jumping into that system recently and trying to understand and wrap my head around it. And then he's got an entire rules video set. He's also got some actual play you can watch. It's been very helpful. So shout out to him.
I've got another YouTube channel. This guy called Seth Eric. He's got a video called "I Made a Role-Playing Game in Excel," and using JavaScript to script behavior in Microsoft Excel, he has used the cells on a spreadsheet as pixels to create a sort of 8-bit style role-playing game with really basic mechanics that sort of look like old Pokemon games or something like that. It's kind of hilarious, worth a shot. Definitely, this guy's pretty damn smart and super fucking geeky, so hats off to you, brother.
And my geek thing is probably something that is every bit as meticulous as that. I found the website of the Stanford Geospatial Network Model of the Roman World. And this is a website that has a map of Rome and its territories, and it tells you how long it takes in order to travel from one point in the Roman Empire to another, going by various modes of transportation, and it's also categorized by season, and you can select whether or not you're going entirely by road, going by foot, going on by cart, or going by ship. This is probably one of the nerdiest things I have found online that is such a niche thing, but it is so awesome to see. So that's going to be my geek thing, the Stanford Geospatial Network Model of the Roman World.
I would fucking kill to have that for Greyhawk. That is so fucking cool.
All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Sounds like a plan.
See ya.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.